So today's text is in an aha moment in Peter's life, which changes his life and also changes the trajectory of the early church. And as is often the case with aha moments, when you dive a little bit deeper, sometimes they seem like they come out of the blue, but if you really pay attention to them, you notice that often they're a long time in the making as God patiently, slowly, persistently undermines our capacity to make reality fit into what we want it to be, and slowly awakens and opens us to reality as it actually is. Up until this point, Peter is pretty comfortable believing that God's missional program for salvation is focused exclusively on the Jewish people. But earlier in this chapter, he is hungry and he goes up on the roof to pray while a meal is being prepared. And while he is praying, he falls into a trance and he has this vision of a sheet being lowered at four corners with all of these creatures crawling across the sheet and a voice saying to Peter, "Get up, kill, and eat." Now, of course, Peter, being a good Jew, honoring the kosher laws, realizes that these creatures are actually unclean, and so he doesn't eat. And the Spirit says, "What God has made clean, do not call profane." Now, earlier on, the Spirit of God has prompted a Roman centurion, Cornelius, and a couple other of Gentiles to go to Peter in Joppa to visit him. And with this vision fresh in his mind, and with that voice moving in his mind as well, Peter welcomes them into the home that he's staying, and he offers them hospitality, breaking another Jewish law. For Jews were not to associate or to visit with Gentiles. And what's most remarkable, I think, about this text, in both cases we get this sense that the Spirit of God is calling Peter to break Jewish law, that somehow God is working on something in and through Peter. And since we believe that the author of Acts is also the same author of Luke, when we look back into Luke, we actually see this theme from the very beginning of Jesus' life and ministry. Remember who the angel appears to in the Gospel of Luke? And you remember what the angel says? "Behold, I bring you good news of great joy for all people." And in Luke, we have that presentation of Jesus, the dedication of Jesus in the temple. And Simeon says of Jesus, "He will be a light to the Jews and to the Gentiles." And remember what happens to Jesus after he is tempted in the wilderness. He goes back home and he preaches a sermon in the temple, and it goes so badly that his neighbors, his family, his friends try to throw him off the cliff and kill him. What was he preaching about? He was simply reminding them that their prophet Elijah had extended God's goodness to people beyond the tribe. They didn't want to hear that. And I think sometimes we don't want to hear that. And what does Jesus say at the end of his ministry in Luke? He says, "Go out and preach repentance and forgiveness to all the nations." And then at the beginning of Acts, he repeats the same thing, saying to the disciples, "Go out and be a witness to the ends of the earth." Even Peter, before he has this aha moment, says at Pentecost, the birthday of the church, he quotes the prophet Joel and he says, "In the last days I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh." What he didn't realize that these days are now. So we can see this movement towards radical inclusive love at the very beginning and throughout the book of Acts. And finally, Peter is being caught up in this movement. And the question is, are we being caught up in this movement to demonstrate the radically inclusive love of God for all people? To understand this, I think we have to look at three F's. I think Peter needed to shift in his understanding of these three F's, and I think we need to follow suit as well. And what are the three F's? They are favoritism, friendship, and fear. So I want to look at those, because until we get these three things right, I don't think we can be faithful to this call to demonstrate the love of God for all people. So the first F is favoritism. Now, from the beginning of our lives, and those of us who have young children, we see this in our children. In essence, we teach them to make choices, to develop preferences, to condition them to have their favorite toy, their favorite stuffed animal, their favorite game, their favorite blanket, their favorite book, their favorite television, and all this is wonderful. And that instinct continues as we grow up, as it shapes our thinking, and it even guides our conversations. I mean, how many of our conversations go like this? I like this. Oh, you like that? I like that. You like that? I like this. I think this is better. This is cocktail conversation in most of our communities, right? It seems harmless. It seems superficial, right? But it can lend itself to division and hierarchy, which can separate us from each other. We see this oftentimes in our families of origin when there are other siblings in the mix. We see a lot of families being torn apart and divided through favoritism. Whether you're the favored child or whether you're the least favored child, it can create a lot of conflict and a lot of suffering in our families. Maybe you were the favorite child, or maybe you know someone in your life that was the favored child. Those people tend to think that their poop doesn't stink, right? That they're holier than thou, right? Or maybe you were the less than favored one, or somebody in your life is the less than favored one. Those are the needy people, always trying to get your affection, always trying to get your attention. Favoritism can really disrupt and be destructive in families. And a good parent and a good mother doesn't play favorites or has this special way of communicating to each child, you're my favorite. Maybe we've been blessed with that kind of parenting. Most of us haven't. And so we all have some work to do. Some of us have to remember that we're not holier than thou. Some of us need to remember that our deepest need can only be fulfilled by God. Either way, we have work to do. The Hebrew Scriptures taught the Jews that they were God's favorite ones, God's chosen ones, God's elect. So imagine the shock when Peter says to them, I truly understand that God shows no partiality. In other words, God has no favorites, arguing that God's love extends to all people equally, regardless of place of origin, race, ethnicity, creed, etc., giving language to the text that Penny reflected on last week, where Philip baptizes a black sexual minority who his own sacred text had taught him was damaged goods and should not be permitted to enter into the worshiping community or the temple. He's just giving theological language to something that is already happening in the early church. And today, Peter is singing out of the same songbook as Paul. Paul's been singing a little bit longer, but it's no small point that the very words that Peter speaks today are written by Paul to the church of Rome. And from this point on, Peter and Paul have a more nuanced understanding of favoritism, essentially saying to the Jews, yes, we are God's favorites, but so are they. And our job is to remind everyone that they are God's chosen and beloved and favored ones. And how do we do this? Yeah, we do it through our words, but show me what you believe. Show me your theology by the actions that you take, by the presence you bring into these conversations and encounters with those outside of your family, outside of your neighborhood, outside of your tribe. We demonstrate this by being friends of God and being friends of all of God's children, which leads to the second F, friendship. I think one can make the case, it is a hermeneutical lens, that the entire biblical arc is about God's desire for friendship with us, God's longing for companionship. The second creation account in Genesis, God creates Adam from the dust of the ground, breathing into him the breath of life. And this begins to ease God's loneliness. But because of God's love for Adam, he realizes, hanging out with me, God, isn't enough for Adam. Adam needs something else. And so he's present to Adam's loneliness. And so he creates animals and birds and creatures, hoping that would fulfill Adam's longing for companionship. And it works to a point, but there's still this deeper longing. And present to that reality, God creates Eve to be Adam's companion. And that goes pretty well. And building on that success, God continues to create human beings through Adam and Eve, friends of God and friends to each other. And so that movement continues with Abraham and Moses and Jesus. And Abraham and Moses are known as friends of God. That's the title, one of the titles that they are given. Now that may seem odd to you, that term, friends of God. What does it mean to be a friend of God? Well, some would argue that is a great delusion. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, said that it was a fairy tale, a projection, a neurosis to believe that God was your friend. And I think we have to listen to that. I think we have to take it to heart. I think it can be dangerous to think that God is our friend, to reduce God to something that we can control or manipulate for our own agenda. That can lead to delusion. It can lead to a very immature faith. And I think that's why friendship with God must be balanced with friendship with God's children in order for it to be healthy and fruitful. Now, where do I get this idea from? Look what Jesus does. God entering into human life as one of us surrounds himself with friends, one of which is Peter. And in fact, we know that Peter and James and John are the inner circle of three of Jesus' closest friends. And we know the story. Peter and Jesus have this wonderful relationship filled with ups and downs. And of course, we remember the betrayal, right? Where 3 times Peter is asked, isn't Jesus one of your friends? Aren't you friends with this guy? You know him. I saw him with you. And every time Peter says, no, he's not my friend. No, he's not my friend. As the charcoal fire is burning in the courtyard, right? And then, of course, we remember that account in John, which is so beautiful. Another charcoal fire is burning on a beach. And the risen Christ, what is he doing? He's making breakfast for his friends. And he pulls Peter to his side, and he says to him 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Are you my friend, Peter? Are you my friend? Are you my friend? By the 3rd time, Peter is hurt. Jesus, you know that we're friends. I love you. What does Jesus say to him? Go be friends with my people. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Be a friend to others the way that I am a friend to you. And then in the Gospel of John earlier, Jesus actually elevates friendship above servanthood. Think about that. At the Last Supper, when Jesus is washing his feet, he is saying to the disciples, I no longer call you servants anymore, for the servants don't know what the master is doing, and you know what I'm doing, so I call you friends. And you are my friends if you love one another, if you love others the way that I love you. Now that seems counterintuitive. How could friendship be more important to God than service? I mean, there is such great need in our world. Doesn't God want us to go out there and make this world more just and righteous? Maybe that's not as important to God as friendship, or maybe God understands, until you are friends with me, you will never truly understand the power of your love for others. I always find it interesting that one of the most profoundly committed to justice Christian community are the Quakers. They have done more to fight war and poverty and racism than any Christian community that I'm aware of. And what is their name. They're called the Society of Friends. And what's their theology? Their theology is that every human being has within them the light of God. And their job is to remind the world that every human being ought to be treated with dignity and respect and compassion. And they have changed the world more than any of us, more than mainline Protestantism, more than Roman Catholicism, more than Christian evangelism or evangelicals, more than anybody. They have been at the forefront of social justice because they're friends of God and they're friends of each other. And they take seriously the call of Jesus to be the light of the world to all nations, which leads us to the third F, fear. Now, maybe you were confused by Peter's words, as I often am. Every time I hear that phrase, fear of the Lord, it doesn't resonate with me. Does God want me to be terror-stricken, panic-stricken every time I sense the presence of God? I don't think that's what the biblical text is leading us towards. I don't think that's what the wisdom tradition is saying when it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I think something different is happening. I don't think God wants to immobilize us through fear. I think God wants to mobilize us through a sense of awe and wonder. And I think that's a better translation of the fear of the Lord. The awe of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Until we realize how unbelievable the love of God is, how indescribable, incomprehensible, unimaginable the love of God is, I don't think we're living into the wisdom of what we're called to do as human beings. I don't think Peter is referring to terror and panic. I think he's talking about a profound awe and wonder. And any aha moment, if it doesn't bring us to our knees, if it doesn't lead us to understand in a deeper way the mystery of God's love and power, then it probably is an ego trip. It probably is infantile. It probably is an illusion. It's probably a delusion if it doesn't bring us to our knees. I remember early on, I was sensing a call to ministry. I'd had a couple experiences that I just didn't fit into any box. They were mysterious, they were numinous, they were confusing, and yet they felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced in my life. And so I went to talk to my pastor about it. I remember saying to my pastor, why would God choose me for ministry? And how do I know this isn't just an ego trip? I'm trying to convince myself that God wants me to be in ministry. And he said two things that really helped me. The first was he affirmed the call. He said, you're not losing your mind. God may be calling you, but he's not calling you because you're equipped for ministry. He's calling you so that he can equip you for ministry. And the second thing he said is, Mark, you wouldn't be the first pastor who has an ego problem. And it was a reminder that I got to keep working at this. We all have to keep working at this. The ego is so subtle, and it's at play, always wanting to pull us away from this sacred work that Peter and Paul are being drawn into. And let's face it, Peter and Paul, they've got pretty healthy egos. Left to their own devices, they probably do a lot of damage. And in fact, Saul did a lot of damage before his experience of awe and wonder in the presence of the risen Christ on the way to Damascus. It often takes an aha moment, a moment of divine intervention, of grace, to awaken us to the soul's calling, as it did for Peter in his vision and in the voice that he heard and this strange visitation from Cornelius and two Gentiles. The truth is, and I think this is a risk that God takes with each of us, there's no way to understand God's love for all people until we first understand God's love for us. It has to start there. For whatever reason, our experience of grace and love is the portal through which God awakens us to God's love for all people. Ken Wilber says it this way: all mature religion begins elitist. It begins with a sense of being chosen, of being favored, of being the beloved of God, as it does even for Jesus in his baptism, right? It starts there, but it better not end there, or else it devolves into something that is not helpful, is unhealthy, in fact, is destructive. So it begins with elitism, it ends with egalitarianism, always. And I don't think this has to strike fear into us. I think it can inspire us and mobilize us to stay with our friendship and allow God to lead us to see in each other what God already sees in all of us. So what does this look like in real time? How does this theology come into play? I want to share a story of a clergy colleague who was doing something she'd never done by talking about this experience. She was driving through a mostly upper-class white community, and she saw 3 cop cars pulling over a young black man in a hoodie. They had him on the ground. They were kneeling on either side of them, and they were yelling. And so she pulled the car over, got out of her car, took out her phone, and was ready to film. One of the cops asked her why she was stopping, what she was doing, and she said, "I'm just watching your de-escalation skills in action." The cop was confused. Do you know this kid?" he said. And when she said she didn't know him, he said, "Then why is it your business?" And she responded to that question with a question of her own. She said, "Am I disturbing the situation in any way?" Realizing they were in the presence of someone who wasn't going to back down, the cop said, "Ma'am, we don't need any trouble here." And she said, "I agree. And that's why I'm here. I'm here for him, and I'm also here for you." Annoyed by this woman and probably annoyed by all the media attention on what the police aren't doing correctly, one of the cops shook his head and he said, "This is our life these days." And then the cop added, "This kid doesn't live in this neighborhood." She said, "Neither do I, but he's my neighbor." And so she stayed there. She continued to watch. She held her phone in her hand while the police politely placed him in their vehicle. And when the young man stood up, helped by one of the female cops, he looked at her and he said, "Thank you for caring." It seems that if we want to truly de-escalate things in our family of origin, in our community, in our church, in our neighborhoods, in our nation, I think we have to have a deeper understanding of these 3 F's. And we need to hear God say, "You are my favorite. You really are. And so are they." We need to hear God say, "You are my friend. So go out and be a friend to all of my children." We need to hear God say, "Don't be afraid of me. Be in awe of me, for I am out ahead of you all, leading you to live into the vision I have of one community." I think only then will we understand Peter's words today when he says, "Can anyone withhold the water for baptizing these people who have received the Spirit just as we have?" Can anyone withhold the baptismal water for those who have within them the light of God, the Spirit of God, just like we do? The deeper truth that our ego will never accept, but our soul is coming to know is this, that we belong to each other and we belong to God. And in this life, everyone belongs. It often takes an aha moment, an awe-inspiring movement of grace, as it did for Saul, as it did for Peter. I think that should be our prayer for this time, that the grace of God would continue to break open our hearts to the vision of one community of brothers and sisters. Our vision as a church is to be a welcoming community to all people. God is out ahead of us. God is doing something in you, in me, in us. And the question is, will we honor that call? Let us pray. Come, Holy Spirit, as you came into the lives of the disciples and the life of the early church. Come, Holy Spirit. We are ready for your prompting. Do in us and through us and with us what you long to do. Come, Holy Spirit. Lead us to be instruments of your radically inclusive love. Amen.